So, how might you balance organisational and employee health? So, as the UK starts to come out of lockdown, and as we witness this rising tide against injustice across the world, I think the biggest challenge for companies right now is how to deal with difference. And I think that requires a different sort of conversation and it requires a different relationship with each other if we are going to make sure that humanity flourishes rather than flounders. So, I'm going to talk firstly about sharing our stories. So, I can't stand in the shoes of someone who carries the name of a slaver. I can't stand in the shoes of someone who is angry and afraid to go out of their home. Or I can't stand in the shoes of someone who is afraid to be in their home because they are with their abuser. But what I can do is I can share my story with you in the hope that you might share your story with me. And the really important thing about that is what that stops me doing and you doing is filling in the blanks. So rather than making assumptions about who you are and why you're acting and saying the things you do, I sort of know where you're coming from. So therefore, I'm more sensitive around that and understanding. So my story is that when we first went into lockdown, I went on freeze frame. I was absolutely terrified that I was going to lose everyone I loved. After about 2 weeks, I started to come out of that pause, if you like, and I started to think about what is it that I can do to help. So I volunteered in a few places, did a few things, but eventually came to the conclusion that what I wanted to do was to take my professional skills out into my network, making videos like this in the hope that they might help somebody. My family are all living up in the northwest of England, so I haven't seen them since lockdown. My parents are in their mid-80s, and the northwest is experiencing a big peak in deaths right now. But I'm really lucky to be sitting here saying that all my friends, my family, and my loved ones are healthy and safe. So when I was growing up in Liverpool, so I studied, I worked, and I lived in the city for quite a few years. And I got used to, when I moved away and lived in other parts of the country, I got used to veiled references around don't trust Scousers, Liverpool murderers. And I experienced, like lots of people from the city of Liverpool did, the injustice of Hillsborough and the fact that justice wasn't served because nobody was held accountable and still haven't been held accountable to this day. I also grew up with a serious stammer. So when I was in my secondary school, when I was asked to read out, I couldn't do it. And the children around me would laugh at me and think it was funny. So I'm triggered by injustice and I'm triggered by people who look down at other people and people who laugh at other people. And I've learned to deal with those differences and those prejudices because I journal, and also because I've had the support of really great people around me to help me to do that. So if you can encourage a conversation where people can share their stories in the way that I just did, I think you will make a significant step forward in starting to understand and acknowledge the difference within your organisations. So think about whether you can build this in to your re-entry arrangements for all people coming back to work. So the next thing I think that companies can start to do is then start to ask, what will promote health, justice and performance for all of us in the here and now? So I've heard a lot of promises and slogans, and my sense is now is not the time for those things. Now is the time that we should be acting about, around these topics. And I think with all of these big world changes happening, doing this now will really help us to stand our ground, try and work out what's next, and start to build our organisations back up. But what I think is really important is that we start to ask some questions. And I'm going to take the words of the late, great James Baldwin. And what he said was, now is the time for action. He talked about, what shall we do? How shall we begin it? How can it be accomplished? And most importantly, how can one invest others with some hope? So asking really powerful questions of your people, I think, can start to really bring people together and start to shift your organisation in the right way, bearing in mind all the anxiety and the issues that are going on in the world right now. The third thing I think that's really important to start to think about is your organisational culture. So your culture is very likely to be very different today than it was 3 months ago. The ways of working that were suitable prior to COVID, some of them are very likely not to work right now. So it's really important to start to ask the question, bearing in mind the conversations that we're having and, the suggestions that are coming through about how we can, promote health, justice and performance. What is it within our organisational culture that is going to get in the way? I'm a great fan of Edgar Schein, and he talks about, don't try and change your culture overnight. It's so multifaceted. It's so influenced by so many things. It can take 10 years. But what he did say was, focus on what's getting in the way first. So if there's something in your organisational culture that is going to get in the way of health, justice and performance, tackle that first. And in tackling that first, you're then paving the way to help people to come together and deliver what needs to be delivered in the new world. Thank you for listening. That's all I've got for today. Next week, what I'm going to talk about is how can we leverage our capacity to tackle seemingly complex and intractable problems. Until then, take care and good luck in all you do. Thanks a lot.